This occurred between 1989 and 1990, when I was about 8 years old. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills, and I sometimes wonder if it changed me in some unknown way. My parents had a home in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and at the time, my brother hadn't been born yet, though I was still an only child. To describe the layout, my parents' house was a 2-story home situated in a cul-de-sac. The ground floor had 2 bedrooms, bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. The second floor contained only a master bedroom and bathroom. From the street, you could only see the garage, one of the bedroom windows on the ground floor, and the window of my mom's bathroom upstairs. To reach the front door, you had to walk along a cement path beside the house, the backyard located further back. My bedroom at the time was the one next to the front door, and my blinds didn't fully cover the bottom of the window, leaving about a 6-inch gap. Being young, I didn't really mind. My bed was positioned against the wall across from the door with the window to the left. According to my mom, this all took place just before midnight. My mom was asleep upstairs, and my dad, a police officer, was working night shifts in another city. I was fast asleep in my room when suddenly I woke up, staring at the ceiling. I don't know what caused me to wake up, or if I just woke up naturally. After my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting in my room, I sat up and looked around. That's when something in the gap of my blinds caught my attention. At first, I thought it might be light reflecting from the streetlight, but I knew there was only one streetlight outside, and what I saw were 2 distinct, glowing spots, spaced apart as if they were on a face. I immediately thought, is that a cat staring at me? I vividly remember trying to rationalize this in my 8-year-old mind. I knew that my cat, Chelsea, had eyes that reflected light at night. This seemed different. Cats' eyes would have a more varied color when they reflected light. These were 2 bright, solid white eyes staring directly at me. I froze, unable to make sense of what I was seeing. I couldn't make out a face. The eyes were so bright. The rest of the figure seemed darker than the night itself. Kept thinking, if this is a cat, how is it looking into my window? My window was about 4 feet off the ground. This was when the most unsettling moment occurred, a memory that has stayed with me ever since. I got off the bed, knelt on the floor to get a closer look at this cat, and suddenly, a pair of glowing white eyes began to tilt sideways, still locked onto me, never blinking. A wave of dread and fear surged through me, and I immediately burst into tears, sprinting down the hallway, through the living room, and up the stairs to my mom. Despite running as fast as I could, felt like an eternity before I reached her. When I did, I was so distraught that I couldn't get the words out. Tears were streaming down my face. My mom became increasingly worried. She finally calmed me down enough for me to blurt out, something in my window." "Are you sure?" she asked. I sobbed, "Yes." My mom didn't even check the window but called the police right away. I don't remember how long it took for them to arrive or what they said, because I was so exhausted that I eventually fell asleep in my mom's bed. I vaguely recall hearing a knock at the door later that night, my mom answering, and the officer saying something to her. I heard her reply, "Okay, thank you. Good night," before shutting the door. Did they find it, Mom? I mumbled, half asleep. No, honey, he said he couldn't find anyone, she replied. The next day, my window was completely covered. Years passed, and by the time I was in middle school, I still occasionally thought about that night. Sometimes I wondered if it really happened. Those glowing eyes were real. One day, on a whim, I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She answered, "Yes, of course." Why? I don't know, just curious, I replied. Then to my surprise, my mom said, "I never told you this, but when the officer came that night, he mentioned that they rushed to our house because shortly before your 911 call, someone else in the neighborhood had reported seeing someone looking into their window." Hearing that gave me chills, and even now, I still wonder, what was watching me that night? The events of this story took place several years ago, during what turned out to be the last vacation my family and I ever went on together. Each summer, we would take a short drive, a couple of hours away from my hometown, to a picturesque coastal tourist spot known for its excellent seafood. That year was no different, except for the fact that we chose to leave in the middle of the night after my dad finished work, hoping to arrive by 7 a.m. and make the most of the day by the ocean. First part of the journey was uneventful and pleasant. I dozed off for a bit, as did my sister and mother. Living in the northeastern U.S., a large portion of the drive is lined with nothing but trees and mountains, creating a peaceful atmosphere that made it easy to fall asleep. But just after 3 a.m., I was abruptly woken by my dad cursing under his breath. Concerned, I asked him if everything was all right, to which he nervously replied, "Yes, honey, go back to sleep." Without thinking much of it, I closed my eyes again. However, moments later, I was jolted awake as my dad swerved the car so violently that I feared my sister might be thrown through the window. That's when the situation began to spiral out of control. My mom, startled awake, shouted at my dad, and we quickly learned what was going on. My dad explained that for about an hour, a Jeep had been tailing us, while closely matching our every move. Every time my dad switched lanes, the Jeep did the same. This was long before cell phones were widespread, so calling the police wasn't an immediate option. We agreed to stop at the next rest area to report the incident. A sign soon appeared, indicating a rest area was 2 miles away. But those 2 miles felt like an eternity now that we realized this was more than a prank. Whoever was following us had ill intention. Finally, we reached the 24-hour rest area and pulled into the front with the Jeep right behind us. I have never felt fear like I did at that moment. My mom, sister, and I rushed out of the car to head inside and call the authorities, while my dad stayed outside, ready to defend himself. What I saw next still haunts me. The Jeep was dark blue, and inside were 5 people, all wearing white masks with strange, unsettling smiles painted on them. They all stepped out of their vehicle, just standing there and waving at my dad. One of them appeared to be holding something, though I couldn't be certain. The next moment felt surreal. A patrol car happened to pull into the rest stop. The masked figures quickly got back into their Jeep and sped off. We flagged down the officer, explained the situation, and provided our statement. We ended up staying at the rest area until dawn, or resuming our trip. To this day, I can't shake the terror of seeing those masked individuals and wondering why they had followed us for so long. What on earth were they trying to achieve? And more frighteningly, what might have happened if the patrol car hadn't shown up when it did? When I was 12, I attended a summer camp to learn horseback riding. We were going to be away from our parents for 4 or 5 nights, and I was both excited and anxious. I had always dreamed of learning to ride a horse due to my love for animals, but I was also nervous about spending so much time away from home and being around strangers. Most of the camp was incredible, everything I had hoped for. But one night, called Sleep Under the Stars, came an experience I'll never forget. That night, we had to leave our bunks and sleep outside in tents. I didn't like tents, but since everyone else was doing it, I decided to go along with the plan. Before bed, there were plenty of activities: campfires, s'mores, and storytelling. When it was time to sleep, 4 of us shared a tent. I could already tell I wouldn't get much rest. I couldn't get comfortable and found myself wishing for the morning to come. While my tent mates fell asleep almost instantly, I stayed awake, trying to count sheep in the darkness. Campsite was filled with tents, as everyone at camp was outside for the night. I was just starting to feel a bit sleepy when I heard what sounded like footsteps near my tent. I was positioned near the mesh window, hoping the cool night breeze would help me drift off. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, but I brushed it off, thinking it was a counselor checking on everyone. Suddenly, I felt a presence right outside the mesh window of the tent. Felt like someone was kneeling just outside. Summoning the courage to look, I saw something, though I didn't look long enough to identify it clearly. The area outside went quiet for a moment, then I began to hear whisper. The words were low and indistinct, but I could make out fragments like savior, sacrifice, and the word wept, which I seemed to hear repeatedly. The whispering would stop occasionally. I'd check outside, only to find the figure still there, right next to the mesh window. Throughout the night, the mumbling continued, on and off. I tried waking someone else in the tent. No one stirred. Eventually, during a quiet moment, I must have drifted off, despite how terrified I felt. I have no idea how I managed to sleep, even for a short time. When I checked the window again, figure was gone. However, just a few minutes later, I heard a loud shriek, followed by a strong gust of wind. The next morning, I asked everyone if they had heard or seen anything strange during the night, but no one else had experienced what I had. I know for a fact that I wasn't dreaming. I saw and heard things that night. Although I don't want to say it wasn't human, nothing about the situation seemed normal. What kind of person would kneel by our tent and mutter under their breath all night? Despite how scared I was at the time, I'm grateful I never had another experience like that again. It all began and ended the day after I finished my final exam at the community college. I'm still unsure if it was a stalker, just a strange break-in. To start, I was incredibly nervous about possibly failing one class, which would have cost me my associate's degree. Later that day, I was hanging out by the pool at my apartment with some friends and roommates, and I checked my phone and saw that I passed the class. I was so excited and told everyone we had to celebrate, because I was the last one to finish finals. 3 days before graduation, I decided we should enjoy ourselves before we all went our separate ways. As the night wore on, we opted to stay in rather than go out, inviting a few more people over. By around 2 a.m., most people had left, leaving just my 2 roommates, their significant others, and one other friend. We decided to go night swimming since our apartment, located on the first floor, was right next to the pool. Afterward, I was ready to relax inside for the rest of the night. My roommates and our friend decided to go out for a bit, leaving me alone, which wasn't unusual. I grabbed some food and went to my room to wait for them to return. My room was located in the farthest corner of the apartment, away from the front door and close to the patio. Since our apartment was at the front of the complex, near the pool, it was also close to the gate, which at the time was left open because it was broken. My room had a large window, and when the blinds weren't closed, it was easy to see inside, especially because I had mirrored closet doors that reflected my entire room. I was waiting for my friends to return when I fell asleep. The last time I checked the clock, it was 3:30 a.m. An important detail is that I had left my bedroom light on when I drifted off. The next thing I knew, I woke up around 5:30 a.m. The faint flashes, like a strobe light, coming from the corner of my room. Groggy and confused, I initially thought my friends were back and playing a prank on me. But as my eyes adjusted to the now dark room, I realized it wasn't my friend. A man, at least 6 feet tall and wearing a green hoodie, was standing by my closet, holding a phone up and taking pictures of me. He didn't seem to realize I was awake. When the reality sank in, I blurted out, "What the hell?" Instead of running away, the man calmly lowered his phone and walked out of my room without any sign of panic, urgency. Stupidly, I chased after him, yelling, "Hey!" But by the time I reached the front door, he had vanished. I rushed back inside and woke my roommates, asking if they were messing with me, but they all said no. That's when I called the police. After inspecting my room, I noticed the only thing missing was my laptop. What was strange was that the kitchen counter had 3 other laptops, 2 wallets, and a $300 speaker. Yet nothing else was taken. Later, we realized that neither the front door nor the patio door had been locked. When everyone came home, the police never found the guy or my laptop. What made the situation even worse was that my camera's SIM card was inside the laptop, meaning all my personal photos were now accessible. A few days later, while packing to move out, something even more unsettling happened. Someone had been looking through my window. They could have easily seen my mirrored closet and the rest of my room, including a very distinctive tapestry I owned. It was black and white, featuring 2 wolves howling at the moon. While loading my car one evening, I looked up at the apartment above mine, and through the blinds, I saw the exact same tapestry hanging on the wall. In the end, the man was never found, and I never saw his face, which still haunts me to this day. I never recovered my laptop or my camera's SIM card. My best advice to anyone living in a college town: always lock your doors and windows, because you never know who might enter while you're asleep. At the time of this event, I was 18 years old, living in a large house in a wealthy area of England. It was the Easter holidays, and my parents were away in France, leaving me at home to study for my upcoming exam. I was actually excited to have the house to myself, looking forward to cooking whatever I liked, watching any movies I wanted, and studying without distraction. Our house was modern, spacious, and located far from the local village at the end of a long driveway, though I had little reason to feel unsafe. Week started off well. I spent my days eating instant noodles, studying, hanging out with friends, and watching Netflix late into the night. There had been several thunderstorms recently, and the heavy wind and rain would occasionally set off the burglary alarms, which I found annoying. I didn't think much of it, always assuming the weather was to blame, so I would just turn the alarm off and go back to what I was doing. Then, on Saturday afternoon, something startled me while I was studying. I heard a noise, like something had hit one of the upstairs windows. I paused my music and listened, convinced myself I had imagined. Resumed studying. For a few minutes later, I heard another noise upstairs, like something being knocked over. My heart raced as I tried to think of a reasonable explanation. But this time, none came to mind. After sitting frozen in fear for a moment, I remembered that I could check the home CCTV footage from our family computer. Quickly reviewed the last hour of footage, but saw nothing unusual. Relieved, I laughed at myself for overreacting. Unaware, my instincts had just saved me from something far worse. Later that evening, I started cooking dinner. Kitchen faced a set of glass doors, and since it was now dark outside, the glass reflected the light from the kitchen and hallway. While serving up the food, I glanced up at the glass. To my horror, I didn't just see my reflection. I saw a man standing in the hallway behind me. He was short and scruffy, holding something I couldn't quite make out, staring at me motionless through the reflection. Instinctively, I bolted. I ran across the kitchen, flung open the back door, and sprinted down the road in sheer terror. Thankfully, I had my phone with me and immediately called the police. I hid behind a bush in the driveway, waiting. I didn't see the man leave the house, and everything became a blur as the police arrived to search the premises. They found nothing, and I started to question whether I had imagined the entire thing. An hour later, however, I learned the truth that would haunt me forever. The police reviewed the CCTV footage and discovered that the man had entered the house 2 nights earlier, on Thursday. He had been in the house for 2 days before I saw him. He was later found and identified as a local homeless man. The authorities suspected it was an attempted burglary that had gone wrong. He was sentenced, and I was reassured that he was no longer a threat. Even so, I've never been able to feel completely safe being home alone again. This happened in the summer of 2016. My old family friend, whom I've known since elementary school, was going on vacation, and his parents asked me to look after their dog and cat while they were away for 2 weeks. They always paid me well, let me stay at their house, enjoy any food, and simply relax. To give you an idea, they live in a country neighborhood, not just a house on the outskirts of countryside. It's a proper neighborhood about 2 miles from town. The area was quiet and seemed perfectly normal. I was working second shift at a factory that summer, from 3 p.m. to midnight, so I could only visit the house in the mornings and early afternoons. The first unsettling incident occurred just 2 days into the job. After finishing my shift, I went over to let the dogs outside. They were out for about 10 minutes, and after ensuring the animals' food and water were set for the night, I let them back in and settled on the couch to decide whether to stay overnight. It was around 12:45 a.m., and I was getting sleepy while watching TV when I heard an unusual sound. The house was usually quiet, with little noise from the animals, though this sound caught my attention. Initially faint due to the TV, gradually grew louder. I thought it might be one of the dogs, but then realized the noise was coming from the hallway near the bedrooms. As I listened more closely, I recognized the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. It seemed like someone was trying to be quiet. By the time I figured this out, the person was almost at the end of the hall, moving into the living room. My fear was confirmed. It was too real to be just my imagination. I stayed frozen on the couch as the footsteps got closer. The person walked through the living room and stopped in the middle of the kitchen. Paralyzed with fear, I was afraid to move, worried that any sound might alert the intruder. It felt like the person stood there for 5 minutes, though it was probably only about 30 seconds. Then they turned around and slowly walked back down the hall, with the footsteps eventually fading away and being drowned out by the TV noise. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head and began to calm down. Suddenly, I heard the sliding door from the master bedroom to the back deck close. Again, I was frozen for a moment before checking to ensure the living room sliding door was locked. Seeing that it was, I quietly retrieved a large knife from the kitchen, began to search the house room by room, unsure if the person had truly left. I should have called the police, but I had no proof, only the sound of footsteps. As I cleared each room, I found no one else in the house. When I reached the master bedroom, I discovered that the sliding door lock was broken. I immediately left the house, putting the knife back and leaving a light on for the animals. I informed my parents, who dismissed it as my imagination, but I couldn't accept that explanation. It felt too real. Final creepy occurrence happened just 2 days later. I was at the house around lunchtime, still unnerved by the previous event. One of the dogs had a habit of peeing when excited, and he had done so on my jeans. I was cleaning them at the kitchen counter when an old man unexpectedly walked in from the laundry room, staring at me with a disturbing smile. We locked eyes for about 30 seconds, as I glanced at the knife blow, preparing to defend myself if necessary. I then asked him who he was. Taken aback, he explained he was a neighbor who wanted to check who was watching the house, since the family hadn't mentioned who was caring for the animal. I questioned the validity of his claim and offered to call the family to verify. After calling and confirming with the mother that he was indeed their neighbor, he apologized for the scare and left, leaving his phone number in case I needed anything. However, after hanging up, the mother revealed that this man had previously caused a scare with another girl and assured me it wouldn't happen again. Reflecting on these events, I can only suspect that the old man from that day was the same one who had walked through the house earlier. Even if he had no harmful intention, both incidents were deeply unsettling. I live in a neighborhood that's more of a highway with houses lining the sides of the road. I wouldn't recommend walking there because there are no sidewalks. I wish I had heeded that warning 2 years ago. At the time, I was with some friends, a boy and 2 girls. Let's call them Dan, Sarah, and Hazel. We had formed a little squad of explorers, delving into forests and abandoned structures. On this day, our first exploration was an abandoned house at the very end of my neighborhood. We started our journey by avoiding the road and walking through the tall grass, which was quite unpleasant. We eventually reached the house. I later discovered that it was built in the 1940s and had been abandoned after its owner had to move into a nursing home in the 1980s. The house had been left untouched since then. After being outside for a while, Dan suggested we go inside. I was excited. Sarah was less thrilled. She sat on the moldy wooden staircase, needing time to process before going in. I couldn't blame her. What if there were squatters inside ready to ambush us? We decided to check out the well, a stone, round structure that resembled the well from the ring. It had an old piece of wood covering the top. Dan, being reckless, stomped on the wood like a maniac. His leg fell through a small opening, and if he had fallen in, we would have been in serious trouble. He managed to pull his leg out and acted as if nothing had happened. I was shocked he almost fell into a well with sharp rocks at the bottom and just brushed it off. We got a bit carried away and started tossing random objects into the well. Figurines, rocks, fake flower pots, etc. Then we went inside the house. As soon as we entered, a very strong odor hit us. It didn't just smell old, it smelled like a plumbing accident. Stench was overwhelming, but we pushed through. Inside, we found some bizarre things. Clothes packed in a freezer, a fireplace filled with dolls, and an upside-down table. It looked like an eccentric art museum. We were excited to discover vintage items in every cabinet and drawer. Things began to feel eerie when we entered a bedroom. The roof had caved in, clothes were stained, and worst of all, black ooze was smeared across the ceiling. I felt like I was going to vomit. We also heard a distinct chewing sound. We left the room and froze when we saw a shadow at the corner of the door. It moved quickly and bolted into the room next to us. We heard a huff followed by a cough, which was enough to make us want to leave. But being the foolish kids we were, we stayed. Eventually, a man in a scruffy shirt and torn gym shorts appeared at the front door. We were stunned. How had we not noticed him? The situation turned from scary to horrific when he lifted his arm to reveal a chunk of raw meat where his skin used to be, blood still dripping. Then, from somewhere else in the house, we heard, "Get the hell out of here." We quickly ran back down the road. I haven't told my parents about this incident, but I probably will someday. I don't want another lecture about doing dangerous things that could have harmed me and others. I haven't heard anything about that house since, but I can't imagine what the people inside would have done to us if they had caught us. I was about 13 years old when this incident occurred, so it was around 8 years ago. My family and I were on vacation in Orlando, staying at the Nickelodeon Hotel, a really cool place with nice water park, great rooms. I was with my parents, my brother, and my 2 sisters. As the oldest of the kids, I was with my 2 younger sisters, who were 8 and 6. We had spent the day at Universal Studios and returned quite late. On our way to our room, my parents, who were carrying all the merchandise we had bought, fell behind. They were juggling a lot of stuff since they had 4 kids, so my siblings and I got ahead of them. The elevator was just around the corner, and we reached it first. As we were approaching, a man stepped out of the elevator. I barely got a glimpse of him, 'cause as soon as he saw me and my sisters, he immediately stepped back inside without hesitation. I should have realized this was a red flag, but back then, I didn't connect the dots. My parents, who hadn't seen the man, didn't think twice and let us get on the elevator. My sisters, eager to press the buttons, rushed inside. We all noticed the man standing at the back of the elevator, his head down, hands behind his back. He looked quite unsettling. His brown hair was shaggy and reached the middle of his neck, and he appeared not to have showered in weeks. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with numerous wrinkles and a creepy grin. His attire included black jeans, a red, black, and white flannel shirt, and a black turtleneck underneath. Considering it was a hot night in Florida, his layered clothing was odd. My youngest sister tried to press the button for the 4th floor, but all the buttons were already lit up. I wish I could say that's when I realized we were in danger, but it didn't click for me just yet. I held the door open for my parents and brother. When my mom saw the man, her smile vanished instantly. I'll never forget the look of fear on her face. My dad also gave the man a strange look, recognizing the need to be cautious. At that moment, I understood something was wrong. Once the elevator doors closed, my parents positioned themselves on either side of the man, prepared to act if necessary. My brother asked my sisters why they had pressed all the buttons. One of my sisters, still oblivious to the situation, pointed at the man and said he was the one who did it. My mom let out a nervous laugh. The elevator was slow, but we eventually reached the 2nd. The man quickly exited and went down the hallway. As soon as he left, my mom closed the elevator doors and we continued to our floor. My My parents made sure we stayed with them closely this time. When we reached our room, my parents were visibly shaken. My dad called the front desk to report the incident so they could investigate. That was the last we ever saw of the man, and we never found out if the hotel staff located him. All I can say now is that I'm grateful my family and I are safe. God only knows what could have happened if my parents hadn't been there. This happened to me 5 years ago when I was 17. I've recounted this story many times because of how incredibly frightening it was, and I still can't believe it happened. I worked at the local Walmart, which was only about a mile from my house. I always walked to work since I didn't have a car, and my parents were fine with it. I never complained and reassured them that walking was okay with me. My shifts varied, but I often ended up with the 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift. This meant I walked to work in daylight, came home in the dark. On the day this happened, everything seemed normal at work. When my shift ended, I started my walk home. As I crossed the parking lot to the street, I noticed a man sitting at the bus stop. He didn't seem suspicious. I just observed him sitting there. I crossed the street in front of Walmart and walked down a long street that would lead me home. The streetlights were very dim, almost non-functional. A few minutes later, glanced behind me and saw the man from the bus stop walking behind me. He was about 100 yards away and seemed to be on his cell phone. While I didn't panic, found it odd that this guy, who had been sitting at the bus stop, was now walking the same path as me. I quickened my pace slightly, but dismissed it as a coincidence, thinking I only had about half a mile left to go. A few minutes later, I remembered the man and looked behind me again. My absolute horror, he was now only 2 or 3 yards away. Even more unsettling, he was walking back, moving silent. I was so startled that I stopped, and he stopped as well. I couldn't see his face because he was facing the other direction. I almost laughed, thinking it was some sort of joke, but a gut feeling told me it was no joke. I suddenly became very aware of the lack of other people around. I tried to speak, but no words came out, so I turned and started running down the street. To my terror, I heard footsteps hitting the concrete behind me. I looked back and saw the man running full speed, now about 20 yards away and no longer facing the other way. I didn't look long enough to see his face. In a few minutes, I reached my house and ran through the front door, which, thankfully, was unlocked. I locked the door and peered through the peephole. The man was gone. My parents were still awake, so I told them what happened, nearly hyperventilating and fighting tears. My dad went outside to check around the front of the house but saw no one. We looked out every window and didn't spot the man. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. I kept fearing that I would hear a window break at 3 a.m. or wake up to find the man standing over my bed. But I didn't. I woke up the next morning without any further incident. From then on, my mom drove me to and from work, and every time I looked around for the man, but I never saw him again. My younger brother, who is 5 years younger than me, would often sleep in my room. I didn't mind, since he seemed afraid to sleep alone for some reason. My parents attributed this fear to nightmares and too many scary movies. One night, he asked to sleep in my room again. My parents saw this and told him he couldn't, warning that if I allowed it, I would also be in trouble. Not wanting to face their anger, I told him I couldn't let him stay and apologized. He begged and pleaded. I firmly refused. Eventually, he sighed in resignation and went back to his room. That night, I shut and locked the door to prevent him from trying to come in again. During the night, I heard the doorknob rattling. I didn't say anything but listened as the lock clicked, indicating it had been unlocked. My brother and I aren't terrible at picking basic locks. We've done it before, but I wasn't surprised when it happened. Door opened, and I saw someone in a crawling position peering into my room. I sighed, assuming it was my brother, and said, "Fine, come in, but don't blame me if Mom gets us both in trouble." The figure crawled into the room, and I expected to feel his weight on the bed, but it never came. A minute passed, and I noticed the door was still wide open, revealing only darkness in the hallway. I called out my brother's name but got no response. I went down the hall to his room and, to my surprise, found him fast asleep in his bed. Needless to say, I spent the night in his room.